At some point, a subtle, disorienting quiet settles over your mind. You stop correcting people's misunderstandings, not because you agree, but because proving your position feels completely irrelevant. Most people panic, assuming their ambition is dying or their identity is disintegrating. But depth psychology reveals a far stranger reality. You haven't lost your fire. You've secretly crossed into the Sophia stage, a profound transformation that the modern ego mistakenly perceives as total collapse. In classical depth psychology, most prominently within Jungian frameworks, the human psyche evolves through 4 distinct stages of internal maturity. The final and most elusive of these is named Sophia, derived from the ancient Greek word for wisdom. Yet long before it became a subject of abstract philosophical speculation, Sophia represented a concrete psychological threshold, the moment where raw, accumulated experience transforms into integrated, quiet knowing. It marks the structural transition from endlessly seeking truth outside oneself to becoming the grounded container in which truth simply rests. Unlike earlier developmental stages governed by physical instinct, emotional idealization, or intense intellectual dominance, this phase operates through subtle discernment and silent presence. It is not an academic achievement, but a fundamental shift in baseline perception. In daily life, entering this stage rarely feels like an exalted spiritual breakthrough or a triumphant moment of enlightenment. More often, it arrives as a subtle, disorienting shift in how you process the ordinary human world around you. You find yourself sitting through familiar social dynamics, workplace rivalries, or family debates, and suddenly notice that the automatic reflex to defend your character or correct a factual error has completely vanished. Where you once felt an urgent, involuntary need to assert your authority, protect your reputation, or prove your intellectual competence, there is now only an even, observant stillness. You still perceive the subtle power plays at work. In fact, you see them with sharper clarity than ever before. But the internal friction required to participate simply fails to ignite. You begin to experience a quiet detachment that is fundamentally distinct from cold apathy. You haven't stopped caring about reality, but you have lost the appetite for self-preservation through performance. This creates a deeply unsettling internal contradiction. Modern culture is constructed almost entirely to stimulate, reward, and perpetuate the earlier stages of psychological development. The relentless imperative to build, conquer, assert, and endlessly defend a curated self. When the inward movement towards Sophia begins, your existing ego structure frequently interprets this loss of defensive friction as a dangerous collapse. The mind panics, warning you that you are losing your competitive edge, growing distant from your peers, or surrendering your life's ambition to passive indifference. You find yourself standing in a confusing psychological middle ground, completely unable to rejoin the frantic, outcome-driven energy of your past, yet deeply uncertain whether this quiet clarity represents a genuine awakening or a subtle, irreversible form of emotional decay. This underlying tension reveals that entering the Sophia stage is rarely a seamless, peaceful, or comfortable transition. Instead, it is a radical restructuring of personal identity that forces you to confront what actually remains when the compulsive need for external validation evaporates. It challenges your entire relationship with purpose, action, and existence. To understand why this psychological shift feels so profoundly disorienting to the modern mind, we must examine the specific, subtle indicators that signal your consciousness has begun operating under an entirely new set of internal rules. When most people picture wisdom, they imagine an accumulation. More books read, more experience gathered, a higher vantage point constructed through years of intellectual labor. We expect the culmination of consciousness to look like mastery, certainty, and an effortless ability to answer life's most demanding questions. Yet the paradox of entering the Sophia stage is that it feels remarkably less like gaining a superpower and far more like losing a deeply ingrained habit. The initial sign that you have stepped onto this threshold is not the arrival of profound answers, but the quiet, systematic dissolution of your need for them. This creates immediate psychological friction. Modern culture conditions us to equate identity with accumulation, progress with momentum, and intelligence with definitive opinions. When the Sophia archetype begins to reorganize your internal world, your relationship with knowledge undergoes a radical inversion. You begin to notice that most human convictions are not reflections of objective truth, but psychological defenses constructed to contain existential anxiety. Concepts, theories, and belief systems that once offered immense comfort suddenly feel paper-thin, like elaborate costumes worn by an anxious ego. You do not abandon these frameworks out of cynicism. Rather, you simply outgrow the illusion that an intellectual model can ever encapsulate the raw reality of immediate experience. This shift reveals a disturbing underlying pattern that most people misread. When you lose the impulse to categorize every experience, those around you frequently interpret your quietness as emotional detachment, professional burnout, or a loss of purpose. You might even suspect it in yourself. Why have the milestone goals that once dictated your focus lost their magnetic pull? Why does the daily performance of personal validation now feel so exhausting to witness, let alone participate in? The unsettling truth is that you are not losing your drive. You are losing your projection. You are stepping out of the symbolic theater where most of human life is performed and into a direct, unmediated relationship with reality. Yet this unlearning is merely the visible surface of a far more fundamental restructuring taking place beneath conscious awareness. To understand why this shift occurs and why it feels so deeply disorienting, we must look beyond outward symptoms and examine the hidden internal engine driving this transformation. To grasp what is truly taking place during the Sophia stage, we must examine the architectural evolution of the human psyche. In Jungian psychology, the soul image, the internal bridge connecting the conscious ego to the vast expanse of the unconscious, develops through distinct symbolic phases. In earlier stages, this internal function projects itself outward onto the world. We seek ultimate meaning in external figures, romantic ideals, intellectual systems, or personal triumphs. The ego relies on these external mirrors to tell it who it is, what it should desire, and what constitutes a successful existence. The world operates as a massive screen upon which our unintegrated psychological needs are continuously projected, pursued, and fiercely defended. The transition into the Sophia stage occurs when these projections begin to withdraw, retreating from the external world back into the depths of the psyche. This process is rarely dramatic or theatrical. It unfolds as a quiet, irreversible loss of enchantment with external validation. The professional titles, ideological battles, and social accolades that once gave your life its structure begin to lose their emotional charge. They no longer possess the psychological power to define your sense of self. What feels like a sudden loss of ambition is actually the psyche reclaiming its energy from the world outside. The internal engine is simply no longer running on external fuel. This structural shift produces a subtle but profound transformation in how you perceive reality. When projection dissolves, you stop viewing people and circumstances through the distorted lens of your unfulfilled desires or unexamined fears. You begin to see things simply as they are, stripped of the heavy emotional commentary your ego once generated around them. A conversation is no longer an arena to win. A professional setback is no longer a personal attack by fate. A relationship is no longer an implicit contract to secure your fragile self-worth. You are no longer reacting to what objects and people symbolize for you. You are finally present with their raw, unadorned reality. This quiet realization marks the formal end of the ego's long-standing reign as the absolute, undisputed ruler of your internal world. Yet, as the compulsive, lifelong urge to control and manipulate reality dissolves, a deeper, far more demanding question begins to take shape in the silence that remains. If your core identity is no longer defined by what you achieve, defend, or acquire in the world outside, what actually remains to guide your choices and sustain your presence? To understand the true magnitude of this shift, we must examine how consciousness structures meaning across a lifetime. Within the Jungian framework of interior development, the soul image undergoes a four-stage maturation. It begins in raw physical instinct, evolves through romantic projection and emotional idealization, and matures into moral or intellectual devotion. Sophia represents the fourth and final manifestation, the archetype of integrated wisdom. In this dimension of awareness, the mind ceases trying to master reality through intellectual dominance or emotional force. Instead, consciousness becomes an expansive, quiet vessel, a container capable of holding life's immense complexity without demanding immediate resolution or forcing artificial certainty. This framework completely reframes the internal conflict that so often accompanies this threshold. The unsettling suspicion that you have lost your ambition or drive is not a psychological regression, but an evolution in how you relate to purpose itself. In earlier phases, action is propelled by a deep unconscious hunger to complete yourself through external achievements, relationships, or social validation. Every goal is an implicit attempt to resolve an inner sense of lack. In the Sophia stage, however, this underlying illusion of incompleteness dissolves. You begin to understand that the frantic urge to control, improve, or manipulate every circumstance was merely the ego's defense mechanism against the anxiety of the unknown. When this realization takes root, your relationship with life's inherent paradoxes undergoes a permanent transformation. Opposites that once caused intense emotional friction, success and failure, certainty and doubt, connection and solitude, no longer feel like warring forces that require you to take a side. Instead of endlessly trying to eliminate tension, you develop the rare capacity to sit comfortably within it. You realize that reality is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be inhabited. Life ceases to feel like a constant emergency requiring your immediate intervention or ideological commentary. The implications of this shift extend far beyond abstract philosophy. When you are no longer consumed by the desperate need to shape outcomes, your energy is liberated for a higher form of engagement. Decisions are no longer made out of fear, social pressure, or time-bound panic, but from a quiet, unwavering internal alignment. Yet this elevated state of perception is not an ethereal concept. It translates directly into concrete reality, fundamentally altering how you move through the world, interact with others, and experience the quiet spaces of your ordinary days. On a daily level, entering the Sophia stage manifests not in dramatic grand gestures, but in subtle, highly specific alterations of behavior. You might notice it during a routine conversation at a dinner table, when someone casually misinterprets your motives or states a glaring factual error. Where your younger self would have instantly interjected to correct the record or defend your character, you now find yourself remaining completely silent. It is not a suppressed, resentful silence that bites its tongue, but a relaxed, spacious presence. You realize that allowing another person to hold their distorted version of you costs you nothing, because your sense of existence is no longer dependent on their perception. You may also notice a radical change when unforeseen friction disrupts your work or plans. When a complex project you spent weeks building is suddenly derailed or accidentally erased, the customary wave of panic or bitter frustration simply fails to arrive. While others might fall into anger or search frantically for someone to blame, you experience a quiet, unexpected readiness to begin again from a clean slate. The loss of effort no longer feels like a personal tragedy, because your self-worth was never invested in the smooth execution of the outcome. You observe the setback with the same even clarity you bring to success. This behavioral shift profoundly alters your closest personal relationships. You stop offering unsolicited advice, recognizing that most people seek emotional validation rather than structural transformation. When a close friend breaks a commitment or acts out of unexamined insecurity, you feel no impulse to construct a narrative of betrayal or play the victim. You listen to others with a rare, unhurried depth, offering them a quiet space where they feel truly seen rather than judged or analyzed. By relinquishing the need to fix, manage, or shape the people around you, your presence becomes remarkably grounding to those caught in their own internal storms. In these quiet, unglamorous moments, the abstract geometry of the Sophia stage becomes living reality. You begin to recognize that you have crossed a quiet threshold in your personal history, one from which you can never truly return. You are no longer performing your life for an invisible audience, or running toward an imagined horizon to prove your worth. Yet as comfortable as this grounded clarity feels, it raises an intimate personal question that strikes at the very heart of who you are. If you look back across the arc of your personal history, you can likely identify the exact moments where old chapters ended. Some broke apart with visible external drama, shattered relationships, sudden career transitions, or loud personal failures. But the transition into the Sophia stage leaves no external wreckage in its wake. It is a quiet, almost imperceptible departure from the person you used to be. You look at your old habits, your former anxieties, and the fierce drive that once forced you to obsessively refine your reputation or seek constant validation, and they feel like artifacts belonging to a stranger. You may still live in the same house, work the same job, and speak with the same friends, yet your internal posture toward existence has fundamentally shifted. There is a profound, subtle grief that accompanies this realization. It is the quiet mourning for the self you spent decades constructing, the fragile identity that fought so hard to feel secure, recognized, and essential in a chaotic world. You can no longer find genuine comfort in taking sides, participating in petty social rivalries, or losing yourself in artificial outrage. The unspoken games that once provided a sense of belonging now feel like elaborate stage plays, where everyone has forgotten they are performing. Yet alongside this sorrow is an immense, unprecedented sense of liberation. You are no longer carrying the exhausting burden of constantly defending a curated self or proving your worth to an indifferent world. This marks the true threshold of psychological maturity. It is the moment where you stop treating your life as an urgent project to be solved and begin experiencing it as an immediate reality to be inhabited. You realize that the deep peace you spent decades chasing was never waiting at the finish line of some distant achievement or spiritual milestone. It was always present in the quiet space created when you finally relinquished the urge to master what was never yours to control. As this understanding settles into your bones, you find yourself standing at the threshold of a final, permanent shift in perception. Ultimately, entering the Sophia stage is not about achieving moral perfection, mastering an abstract philosophy, or elevating yourself above the ordinary flow of human existence. It is the quiet, undeniable return to what was always present beneath the noise of personal survival. When the illusion of separation dissolves, you no longer relate to the world as an arena to be conquered, but as a living mirror of consciousness itself. Wisdom, in its highest psychological sense, is not the intellectual accumulation of endless answers, but the rare, quiet capacity to remain deeply grounded in the presence of mystery. You stop demanding that life explain itself to you, and instead, you become the silent container through which reality observes itself. If you recognize these subtle shifts within your own experience, you have not lost your drive or drifted away from meaning. You have simply stopped playing a game you were never meant to win. Stepping across an invisible threshold into an unshakable way of being, where simply existing becomes its own profound answer.